Grand Rising, beautiful creatures. This is Aradia Arcanum. Welcome. This video is a collection of voices speaking out on the topic of feeding and what it means to them. Feeding within the realms of vampirism and otherkin. Now, please keep in mind that the concept of feeding can mean different things to each individual, bloodline, or house. Now, if any of these voices call out to you, all of their information will be in the description of this video. Sit back and relax, light some incense, dim the lights, grab your favorite drink. I hope you enjoy.
Darkest greetings. My name is Magistra Xia, and I have been asked to talk about the act of feeding. What is feeding to the vampire? Personally, I feel the word is outdated, and in my esoteric practice, Order of Omnia, we have a different term, and that is absorbing. The word feeding, I feel, is the wrong word for what we do. You can read many books on how to feed, but the best way to learn how to do it is to go out into the world and actively practice. Every living thing around us takes in energy and releases it. So in order to begin to absorb, we have to deprogram the human idea that this is in some way bad or negative. You do not have to ask permission, although others will say you have to. The lion doesn't ask the gazelle if he can eat it. He simply does. And this is in accordance with the highest law, natural law. So let's begin. To be a successful feeder, you need to have mastered visualization. And to have mastered visualization, you need to have developed your mind through meditation. If you cannot focus, you cannot absorb or give energy efficiently. So vampirism as an art is skill building. It is very much like math or science. These skills build on one another, and if you're missing a piece of the puzzle, your efforts will not fit together. So I suggest working on visualization techniques and meditation to learn to focus and block out any distractions. You will most definitely need these skills. Visualization and meditation needs to be practiced every day. It is two major keys to making this art function. There are many ways in which to feed. Please don't read some books and think this is only it. Also, what works for one vampire may not necessarily work for another. So keep that in mind. Most popular methods of feeding can at times be difficult. No one talks about the actual results and how you will know you've had an actual successful feed. Most books out there right now will give you methods, but results are everything. So once you have the building blocks of meditation for focus and visualization for your mind's eye well established, well then if you were my student, we would talk about feeding. Books you can find this information in are all over the internet and in the libraries. Beginner methods really just are ambient, which is to submerge yourself in large crowds and visualize the energy above the crowds as a misty fog-like substance. You're going to use your breath work. You should have established this with your studies and meditation, and you're going to extend your own tendrils with an out-breath, visualizing those tendrils grabbing at the misty fog for you. On the in-breath, you will take the energy in through the mouth and visualize it coming down to the solar plexus. There, you will see that energy collecting into a round, circular ball. That ball will grow in size. And if you plan on using this energy as an offering later on in your ritual, you will do your best to store this energy. That is another act in and of itself, which is outside of what we are doing today. Watching the ball move from a liquid-like texture, you're going to see it harden into a marble ball. You will then visualize the marble ball melting away behind a curtain of misty-like fog. Now, when you need to use this energy for ritual, you will come back to this visualization. And when you're using your breathwork in ritual, you will imagine the marble ball exploding and the shards of energy bursting forth up through that spinal line of offering. The other forms of feeding you can read about are tactile, feeding from touch, such as a handshake or a hug, target feeding, which is specifically reaching out your energy tendrils to one person that you see before you and directly taking their energy. Tantric, which is feeding during intimacy. And when we think of intimacy, we think of sexual intercourse. It doesn't necessarily need to be that sort of act. Intimacy can be many things. With this method, there is surface feeding and deep feeding. Then there is astral feeding, which happens when we dream. This is an advanced form of feeding, but truly, all of these methods, again, are like math. You can make any of these feedings more complex or advanced if you have the skill set. How do you know if you've done it with results? There will be physical manifestations. What can physical manifestations entail? It can be feelings of touch, feelings of cold, heat. All of those things will give you ideas as to how to continue on your journey. Happy feeding. Enjoy the life force. The energy can alter your life and your purpose if you allow it to.
The topic of vampiric feeding is one of great controversy. There is no singular definition, technique, or origin story that tracks across the board. Every vampire has a different reason as to why they feel they need to feed, what they prefer to feed on, and they have a preference on how they get what they want or need. Now, I do know that there are people out there in the vampire community that do not vibe with the term feeding. It's either because it's too close to the fantasy side of vampirism, or it just plays too much into the fiction vampire trope, which I get. When I was younger and less experienced, I rebelled against allowing myself to immerse too deeply into that fantasy space as well. But for me personally, I am team feeding. I enjoy feeding. I enjoy using the term feeding. I personally enjoy the juxtaposition of the reality and the fantasy and kind of playing in the blurry space between them. As a witch, I find enjoyment and enrichment in the liminal and the paradoxical nature of vampiric spirituality and practice. Real living vampires exist in contradictory yet fluctuating spaces between myth and reality, between human and beast, between chthonic and ethereal, between earth and other realms, and we often express our nature through the immersion of certain types of myth, magic, and fantasy. The balanced vampire understands where the appropriate lines are drawn. The unbalanced vampire doesn't exercise proper discernment and falls too deeply down the rabbit hole of overzealous immersion and toxic obsession. But that's not unique to vampirism. You find the same sort of unbalanced, obsessed immersion in all sorts of alternative esoteric spaces. So with all of that said, feeding, in a broader sense, is the act of gathering and then consuming life force energy or life essence. It's also labeled as prana, chi, or ki, or something of that sort, but it's not incorrect, but it's not totally correct either. Traditionally, things like prana can be collected from more than just human life force, but the majority of vampires would tell you their feeding sources need to come from a human element, either energy or blood. A vampire may need or strongly desire to feed for a plethora of reasons, but there are some most common origin stories. Some vampires believe that they have a higher turnover rate of their own personal pranic energy because they are constantly at a higher magical output just naturally, and therefore they need to feed on outside third-party life force energy to keep up with what they are constantly burning. Then there are those who believe they have an energetic deficiency by means of either just a natural deficiency, kind of like a vitamin deficiency, I guess, but it's energetic and of the spirit or of the energy body. Or sometimes people believe they have an injury to one of their chakras or something's wrong with their energy body, and therefore they need to supplement to keep up with their energetic health. There are purely sanguine vampires that really don't have much to do with energy. Well, that depends. So there's sanguine vampires who they consume blood because they believe that it does have, as a substance, blood has the highest concentration of life force energy of any substance out there. So because blood has the highest concentration of life force energy of any substance, these kind of vampires only need to consume just a little bit, and it does the same job for them as pulling a bunch of energy from the ambient energy of a space. But there are also sanguine vampires out there who consume blood because they have what is usually an unknown medical ailment that the consumption of blood helps to alleviate. These types of sanguine vampires typically have to consume more blood than other kinds of sanguine vampires. They sometimes call themselves med-sangs, medical sanguines, and modern medicine does not have the answers for the types of things that they feel and experience, but they unequivocally have a lessening of symptoms when they consume the blood. Then you have a third type, which is sexual vampires or eros vampires. And they are either a subset of psychic vampire because they are psychically feeding on the energy that is being generated through courtship and through sex, or maybe they are closer to their own type of sanguine vampire if they're feeding on the sexual fluids that are produced during sex. Both are a thing. And even sometimes vampires have a combination of the above. Sometimes you get one vampire that has a medical sanguine need, but also has psychic needs. Sometimes it's one side or the other. The way feeding needs configure within each vampire is different. I find a lot of vampires, especially younger ones, get into this headspace of constant wallowing in negativity about their feeding needs. Get it, when I was younger, I was right there too, especially in like my teen years when I first awakened, and in my early 20s when life was the worst ever. In my mid-30s now, it's a little different. I personally find my need to feed drives my passion for life. It drives my desire to be successful because I crave experience and I crave knowledge, and I know it's my vampiric nature and my desire to feed on decadence that has driven me to go down this path and become who I am today. I enjoy the thrills of life. I enjoy being in the public to feed on things happening like, the bustling streets of New Orleans, or the ambient energy floating above enjoyable outings or historical monuments or things of that nature. I do have a direct sang and energy donor, but the bread and butter of my adult years is the travel and the meaningful experiences with family and close friends, and adventuring in new and unfamiliar places and learning the history of the ancient spaces. All of that stuff is really what I crave nowadays. But overall, when it comes to feeding and the attitude about feeding throughout the community, is that I just hope to see more people learn to embrace feeding as a natural part of who we are and not a detriment. Eating food is not a detriment to the human experience, so feeding should not be a detriment to the vampire experience. I really hope to see more people in the vampire community come to see the act of vampiric feeding more as something that is a deep and beautiful, intimate experience to share with somebody, or like a deep appreciation for an area you're in or an event that you're experiencing, and treat these things as uplifting and empowering, not only for yourself, but for the donor. And the donor can also have this soothing and even healing experience through you feeding off of them. This ailment and detriment mindset that is often surrounding feeding is serving nobody any good. And I hope people can learn to maybe ritualize the experience and uplift it and put it up on a higher pedestal of things to enjoy, so they can get the full range of benefits from feeding.
I'm Jabbar. I guess with my status in the VC, I have the title of Lord Jabbar, name that I've given myself in this rendition: Sultan Trismegistus AgaKhan Asotus O'Malley. Elder of Clan Asotus, one of the elders in Clan Asotus, which I helped build. Also the founder and progenitor of House Banu AgaKhan, which is my bloodline. This is within the VC, vampire community at large. Of course, I've had different titles and different stuff, but we're not going to go there, for different organizations that I've been into prior to this, which some know my history. But this is regarding feeding, the question feeding, as to what that means to me, my definition, and in my experiences in that. So I guess I'd like to say that, I guess what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take it back, because this is my definition, my experiences, my opinion. I'll take it back to my culture. So recently I've searched my DNA. I've always, been Black, African American, born that way, whatever. But I didn't really know my history too much. But happily, with the technology that they have out here nowadays, with genetics in different ways, where you can actually do your genetics and get your DNA, different applications and stuff that they have, out here. I did some and found out that, as my percentages actually is growing on different things, but I found out that I am from the Sahel, Mali. So I started researching that. The Mali Empire, which at one point was various countries in Africa and West Africa. That was an empire. Then Ghana, Nigeria, Mali, Timbuktu. It was a conglomerate of countries that was once in that empire. You would know one of the historical figures, Mansa Musa. Mansa, which means king, was one of the kings, popular kings from the Sahel, Timbuktu region. So, found out I have a high percentage of that in my bloodline. So, doing more research on that. But in that research, I found not only were they Islamic and, spoke the Arabic language and pretty much were like in this Islamic empires back in like the Middle Ages. They were known for, Timbuktu, the University of Timbuktu, which was a lot of scholastic and academic stuff going on there in that time frame, golden age. Also, when I say gold, that's where I want to come in. Mansa Musa himself was known for being one of the richest men or kings of all time. Literally, nobody has actually succeeded in being richer than him at this present moment. So his worth was, you can't even account it. But I can imagine, and this is where I'm going to get into with feeding. For me, all the gold, pretty much, a lot of the gold that is in Europe right now. Literally, that man was one time sitting on all of that before it started making its way to Europe, in Spain and all that. He owned all of that. That was in his empire. Like, it was so much gold in that empire that it was like limitless. And he once sat on all that. So like a lot of the riches that is in Europe was once his. Before the diaspora later on. But anyway, so I started noticing that my culture, gold is an element. I think it was more deeper than just jewelry and all that. Not only was it used for like religious worship, it gave them power. They wore it. It's not only like the skin of the gods, but it fed them. It gave them energy. All in those empires, the kings and queens and just normal people, you see them, they just wore massive amounts of gold, even all the way up until this day, because it's so much gold over there. It's vast. It's so vast. Like they still digging it out the grounds. And I believe that has gotten to my blood, because when I just like view gold, or if I go to the jewelry shop or anything, or just see it on people, it is not definitely only in my culture, but I could feel that energy from my ancestors, from the Malian ancestors, from that Timbuktuan ancestry that is in my blood. I can feel how that electrifies them and makes them. And that is the reason why I started collecting gold myself. And that is feeding to me, literally. And this is recently, I've just, as I've studied and got my DNA results back, this became a recent thing. And now I'm all in researching, and I do plan to visit the country. I plan to go to the Sahara in Mali and visit and just see, feel how I would feel in what would be my native land had I not been, my ancestors not been brought over here to America. What's in my bloodline. But in that, I believe that, and that is literally how when I see gold, or I put it on, or I touch it, or I feel it, I'm telling you, it gives me a power that is like, oh my God, incalculable. And again, like I said, each one of us, feeding is going to be, different for each one of us. But for me, I found in recent times, that is what is feeding me. That is what I'm yearning for. That is what gives me power. It gives me like a subconscious energy to feel proud. And I realized, a religious energy, an Islamic energy, a Sahelian, which is in my blood, energy. I'm from the sun. I'm from the Sahara. I'm from the Niger. I'm from Timbuktu. And thinking about it, just putting those images in my head, putting myself in that place, literally has been what has been empowering me lately and making me feel proud. And I'm looking forward to going forward, not just in my day side and everything that I'm dealing with here in America, but I'm looking forward to visiting the country one day, and I'm getting my hand on as much gold as possible, the element, because literally I believe that is the thing that connected my ancestors and made them feel godlike, and it's actually working for me like that right now. So that is feeding to me, my example of it. That is the element, which is created in stars. So I could just imagine, it's a star element. It's literally stars, exploded star material, gold, silver, copper, all of those, heavy elements. That's supernova power, cosmic power. So that's where I'm at with it. Sorry that it's, again, this is my opinion. I'm a cosmic man. I do study the universe. That's Timbuktu was literally about that, studying the cosmos, cosmology. So I take things out to the cosmos. That's what I do. That's what I love. That's what feeds me and gets me going. And on that note, I'm just going to say peace.
My name is Madam Miseraya Erebus-Asura. I hope you are doing amazing. First and foremost, I would love to thank Lady Iradia for giving me this opportunity to be part of this amazing project and giving more perspectives on this topic. So thank you so much. I feel like it would be very beneficial and helpful for others. So again, thank you. I have been in the community for about 7 to 8 years. I am a cowmaid to House Pride of Asura. I am childer to Lord Traveler Asura MacPhee of House Pride of Asura. I am progenitor to my bloodline Erebus. I am an initiate to the Order of the Black Marble, and I am a founding member of New Era Covenant. So many titles. I am also a vampire. That is my creed. I know, so original, just amazing. When it comes to feeding to me is pretty self-explanatory. It is gaining sustenance. For us vamps, it would be life. Life is the sustenance. For me specifically, I am a Psi vampire. I feed on energy. Energy is what makes me feel great. I personally have always adhered more to being an energy feeder ever since I was young, both unawakened and awakened. Now, in terms of it being a necessity or a want, I feel like it's a bit of both. It's a want and a need. Now, in my personal experience, the want is I want to feed on specific energy. There are some energies that make me feel great and some that make me feel like utter crap. I'm not even gonna lie. Then There's the choice of donors. That is what I want. That is who I want to feed on. There's many more to it. Again, personal. In the terms of necessity, it's I need to feed in order to feel a little bit more balanced. Now, that could sound a little bit crazy, because how does that work without sounding like you have issues? It's not what the media says in terms of leaky chakra, I have a blood deficiency. No, not for me. It's if I'm feeling down or I'm feeling a bit unbalanced, I would go and see specific people, friends, family, doesn't matter, and enjoy their company, enjoy the positive energy that they're emanating, so I could feel better. Or I would take a walk in the park. Nature itself is energy, and that also could help balance me out. There are so many ways to gain energy that, of course, is personal, and that's what helps me. That's where it's a need for me, personally. A lot of the time in the community or outside of it, society in general, you see different teachings on feeding. There's books, there's videos now. The internet is definitely a plethora of information, both bad and good. Unfortunately, due to the internet, a lot of people are forgetting the word consent. They are actually dismissing that word, which is a huge thing for me, especially. Consent is big. If somebody says no to being a donor, do not force them, do not coerce them, do not manipulate the situation. That is just beyond disgusting, and no, we do not do that. We do not support those type of actions, that type of behavior, absolutely not. And I hope that this video, this project definitely shows that there are more positives to this topic, that there are more, obviously there are negatives. There's always pros and cons to everything. There's always a few bad apples, but hopefully it does not poison this tree, and we hope we can show different avenues that people can go to for information. We hope we can be that beacon of information and be able to help others who are just trying to find themselves and do better for themselves. So again, thank you for hearing my little spiel, and I hope you all do well. Much love and light to you all. Thank you.
Ave. Greetings. My name is Lord Shaolin Asura MacPhee, one half progenitor of House Pride of Asura, sitting council elder, Nueva Covenant Court. The topic of feeding when it comes to vampirism, that is a very multifaceted topic of discussion. Feeding, as it stands, could mean many things to different vampires and what their go-to niche of feeding means. As a vampire, we do feed, regardless of your understanding or interpretation of your nature itself. There are sanguines that obviously feed from the blood source directly. There are vampires that feed off of emotion and the invoking of different emotions. There are vampires that feed off of living life force within crowds. That's why many of us live in big cities, because it's readily accessible. There are other vampires that feed off of the elements. In the middle of a thunderstorm, rainstorm, they collect the natural energy of the environment. There are different modes and methods of feeding, one not above the other. Simply a matter of choice and preference. There are some vampires that their go-to may be blood, may be different sources of the practice, and that is their preference, their go-to. However, as a vampire, we strive to be the best version of ourselves. So I myself classify myself as a universal feeder. I have my preference. However, I can feed through multiple sources. Now, the topic of why we feed. Is there an inherent need? Is there an inherent deficit that we are filling? Or is it a born skill? I think that goes person to person, experience to experience. In my own personal experience, I don't look at myself as having a deficit or a sickness that I need to fill. This was the way I was born, and when I came into my awakening, I began to be more conscientious of that. I was brought up in the martial arts. Energy exchange within warfare is second nature to me. That's how I became cognitive that there was something more going on. It wasn't until 19, 20 years old that I found the community and I found the teachings that existed within the community, and I essentially found the missing piece of my own puzzle, and everything started to make sense from there. Now, feeding is not just exclusive to that of the vampire. There are Therians that feed, there are wares that feed, and every dark entity, dark archetype, has their own methods that work for them, that it's inherent and natural for them. The were may feed through the hunt, through the pull of the moon, through the flesh, through just the chase, the inherent desire to hunt and chase and move. That is specific to the were. The Therian, they have their own practices that make sense for each classification of Therian, which is very much more naturalistic and tied to nature itself. The vampire is the ones that feed off of the life force and the living pulse that drive us all forward. There was a riddle given to me once as a young fledgling. What happens when a vampire feeds from a vampire? Who gets their fill first? Who gets drained? This left me scratching my head as a young vampire in this community, but it's been one of those never-ending searches to unlock the teaching behind that question. The true lesson in that was vampires do not feed off of other vampires. Now we get into unboxing the concept of communion, the concept of cycling, the concept of how is energy used in a ritual format to fellowship with other kin and others of the blood. There's been many of times that I've witnessed vampires energy exchanging amongst themselves. This is not vampires feeding off of one another. A vampire's energy is refined, recycled, and purified. So when a vampire and another vampire, or a vampire and an other kin feed, and I use that word within quotations, amongst each other, that is not feeding. That is communion. That is fellowshipping within an energetic impulse within one another. This is usually done in some sort of a ritual format or ceremonial format. This is harvesting. These words, harvesting, communion, cycling, they are all specific to a bigger end goal than just feeding. There are energy signatures that are more grounded. There are energy signatures that are more chaotic, and they need a constant influx of that energy being fed from. My personal energy is very grounded. I don't necessarily need, quotation on that, to feed on a regular, constant basis because my energy is dense and concentrated and very grounded. There are other individuals that they need, quotations, to feed on a more constant basis. You find that out when you start to uncover your own nature and start to understand your own energy pulse. But when it comes to communion with other kin, this is you go out to an event, you're amongst family and friends and loved ones, and you feel that camaraderie and that energy, that those good vibes, quote unquote. That is communion. You can take the communion aspect and put it more in a ritual format, that you're actually practicing energy magic, and you're not only harvesting your own energy to collectively share with the whole of the group, but you're ciphering it amongst a smaller circle, so that energy refinement becomes more and more palpable and more refined, building and building and building until it completely explodes, and then everybody within that circle could take that energy amongst themselves and add to it. That is the essence of communion. There are some vampiric practices that harvest it to give it to the great ancients. There are others that harvest it to give it to that collective circle. Depends on what the intention of the ritual is. But is that feeding? Or is that something more? I depict that as something more. Feeding is specific. It's unrefined energy. It's grabbing from that energy cloud when you're walking in the middle of a crowded train station and being able to cycle it through your system, layer by layer, chakra by chakra, refining and purifying the garbage out and leaving the refinement in. That is feeding. And that is something that we do naturally. And you have to teach yourself how to refine. You have to teach yourself how to cycle it through those purifications within. And that comes with time and experience and guidance. Being able to commune with other of the blood or other kin that are family, that is a fellowship, that is a celebration. So even though the technique of it all goes within the classification of feeding, it is much more. Each individual is going to have their own interpretation of this complex conversation. I trust that my words resonate and add to, and I appreciate the opportunity to have been given this time to speak. Thank you very much for your time and listening.
Magistra Khalidah, feeding. Feeding is the act of taking life force energy from human beings. This energy would otherwise be radiated into the universe, dispersed, or lost. Energy is being transferred all the time. It's most often interpreted as emotions. The vampire feeds consciously and with intent. Many individuals feed on the energy of others, but it's a rare few that do this both consciously and intentionally, without reserve, and use this energy for purposes of development and transformation through acts of ritual and sorcery. The vampire does not take energy from others on some whim. Rather, the vampire needs this energy in order to rise in their apotheosis. The vampire is a primal, natural predator, in that vampire live and thrive by consuming the energy of their prey. In order to feed efficiently, It's necessary for the vampire to rewire the human programming, which implants the false idea that predator equals exploitation. As the predator is a necessary component in the food chain, the vampire is a vital link in the energy pyramid. Vampires do not feed to fulfill some kind of energy deficiency, and they are not trapped in any victim mentality or deathist mentality. Vampires understand the role and responsibility of being a predator. As my brother Lord Miguel of Hidden Shadows has coined the term, vampires are honorable predators. Vampires feed without reserve on all people at all times. This can be beneficial to the food. The vampire raises their energy frequency through the application of the foundational, practical, or dayside aspects of their technology, which aid them in providing a good life that is free from distraction. This nourishes the black flame that all vampires possess, which has a frequency that distinguishes itself from the energy of humans. It is vital that the vampire starts with this basic and often ignored foundation. The reason being, it's difficult to practice the night side work when you can't pay your bills, or lack a healthy body, or lack a safe living situation where you have a modicum of privacy. Vampires also raise their vibration through the astral or night side aspects of their technology. Should the vampire implement feeding through regular practice, it's reasonable to say that they could raise the vibration of individuals or groups through the constant exchange of their vampiric frequency with that of the human frequency. As the vampire has devoted theirself to a practice of philosophy which is rooted in reason, they feed constantly as consumption increases survival. While there are diverse methods to feeding, and each have their merit, the most common technique to introduce those beginning to learn about this technology is ambient feeding. A common shared experience is attending an event where there are a large number of people, concert, convention, a lecture class. When people gather, energy exchanges constantly as they interact. When a large group of people gather, it can create an atmosphere or a haze of energy. Let's use the scenario of the vampire court. This is a social structure that gathers together different individuals within the vampire community in a haven, a safe space designated for dialogue and ritual. It also creates a feeding ground for the vampire, concentrating the energy in the space as all individuals present share a common purpose and intent, which is to be present and experience the event of the vampire court. The energy is further raised through a curated discussion, priming attendees' thoughts to a subject that takes them out of the human mindset and turns their thoughts and energy to something beyond the visible reality that they experience regularly. The energy is raised further by ritual aimed at opening channels of energy of the human participants, the vampire participants, and the disincarnate who are contacted during the ceremony. As the energy rises and expands, the vampire can extend some of their own core energy into the miasma or atmosphere of energy and draw it down into their subtle and astral bodies by their will, containing it there until it is to be used in acts of vampiric sorcery which aid in serving the will of the vampire.